Hi, everyone, and welcome to episode 5 of The Hidden Work of Leadership. Today's guest is Steve Sawyer, who recently retired from a business career spanning 45 years. Steve's primary work was with Woodruff-Sawyer, a large commercial insurance brokerage company based in San Francisco. During his tenure, the company grew from 35 employees in a single office in San Francisco to over 600 employees across 14 offices. Today, it is the second largest privately held insurance brokerage in the country. Along the way, the values and culture were intentionally shaped by a handful of senior leaders, including Steve. I want you to listen closely to Steve, who Lisa and I think embodies the uncommon posture of knowing yourself deeply and working out of that knowledge. As the son of the company's founder, for Steve, it was never about entitlement, but instead about stewardship, building trust, and the untold joy of watching people grow and flourish. Steve Sawyer, so good to have you with us today.
Great to be here, Michaela. I feel honored to be asked to join you.
And Steve, you and Lisa are getting to know each other sort of live time, but we've gotten to know each other a bit over the last few years. And I told Lisa when we were making the list of potential guests for this very first season of The Hidden Work of Leadership, your name was very top of the list. And I don't say that to it's not a pressure statement. It's just, I really think you embody a lot of what we're talking about here. So let me jump in on our first question. Steve, what do you uniquely bring to a leadership setting? In other words, what makes you you?
Boy, Michaela, that's a great question, and I think it's one that really prompts a lot of reflection. I think to be a leader, you first of all have to have competence in whatever your subject matter is or your discipline, because that's first of all that undergirds your credibility with others. So I think competence, typically some level of experience, um, and but then I think the next word that comes to mind is humility, understanding. Uh, I think people respond to humility, and I think even a level of vulnerability uh, in terms of what yes, you're competent and capable, but also not trying to be what you're more thing than you were meant to be, which I think will be a theme that I'll talk about throughout this conversation. Um, and I think also as part of that, I think then a sort of a theme within that is being a servant as well. I think those are the things that to me undergird what is an effective leader, and one that when I look at my experience and the organization I was privileged to be a part of, I feel like the people I was privileged to serve with embodied those things.
That's awesome, and I could not agree more and affirm both the what I call the table stakes. Right, we have to have competence. We build our experience base, and then it's these character traits that really make all the difference. Tell us a little bit, Steve, about your own leadership journey. What we're trying to do here is kind of pull back the curtain and let people see what we're calling the hidden work of leaders, the work that's happening internally and in a much smaller, quieter way, while all the big things are happening out there
Yeah.
externally. And the inner work is not often visible to anybody. But we have seen, I have seen, Michaela has seen over and over again, that without that work, we don't see some of these qualities emerge that you've just described. And leaders do get out over their skis and make big mistakes and don't own them. And yet, if you've done some of that inner work, it shapes your own pain and suffering in some ways, shapes your own journey and how you show up. And so give us a little window into some of the Steve Sawyer story here.
Okay. Yeah, and what you said about getting out in front of your skis, I think sometimes we learn more from our mistakes than our successes over time, too. You know, I think to answer that, Lisa, we need to probably just give a brief overview of my background and experience leading into that. Right after college, my first job out of college was working in sales for IBM. And what was really ironic about that is I was a history major coming out of college, so I got hired by a tech company. So I share that just as encouragement that it doesn't matter what you major in if you can bring the right skills to the table. But the main takeaway from that experience was that I got some really great training in basic selling skills. I was one of these unique people that actually kind of figured out in college that I wanted to not only be in business, but I thought I wanted to be in sales. And I never wavered from that, never departed from that. And I feel like God has affirmed that in many ways in my personal experience. I did that for a couple of years. Never saw it as a long-term path. I wanted to go back to business school, did that. And then afterwards, I had the blessing and vision of joining what was at that time really my father's firm. At that time, a relatively small insurance brokerage firm called Woodruff-Sawyer Company. The name is, his name was on the door, became my name is on the door as well. And but I was attracted to that because of the values and culture of the firm, even at that time. It was about integrity, it was about excellence and competence, but also it was a place where I could have a stake in the ownership, not feel like somebody in New York or Chicago was going to be telling me where I was going to live and how I was going to do the job, but I could be a part of that, and where I could be living up, frankly, my values. I was newly married at the time. I wanted, when my wife and I had our family, wanted us to be able to really put down roots and build community. So those were preeminent values for me. I basically was successful selling and always have been. It was just, I like to think, it was part of what God made me to do. And when I say that, it's, this is about a process of engendering trust, about bringing competence and value to people. That's how I've always viewed the selling process, not something where you're pushing a product, if you will. And, we were selling a pure service. So it was about what's our expertise and how are we bringing that to clients. So and then we were successful as a firm, attracted good people, and really started to grow. We're in Silicon Valley. We had major focus on the technology space and then other supporting industries. I did a lot of work and was a founder in the biotech space and brought some real innovations in approaches to that. We had other areas of construction and real estate and then employee benefits. But for me personally, what was emerging was that, particularly then as my father retired and there was a group of, there was a leadership team, the train was kind of running down the track where, okay, at the next leadership change, was I going to be the CEO?
Oh, interesting.
And I had a long time to be sort of looking at that and thinking about it and praying about it. During this time, I was the largest revenue producer in our firm as we were growing and doing well. And I got joy and excitement with that. I was energized by it. As I looked candidly at the prospect of being CEO, I really didn't, I really didn't feel very comfortable with it. And I had a lot of time to think about it and pray about it and even just sort of look at scripture around it. And there came a time when the next transition was going to take place, and I still remember this. At that time, the chairman was in a board meeting. He was starting to talk like I was kind of going to be moved into that position.
Yeah.
And I remember walking out of that board meeting, following him to his office, closing the door and sitting down with him and saying, I've had a long time to think about this and pray about it. And he was actually a Christian as well, actually one of my closest friends. And I said, I don't think I'm the right person for this job. One, and the reasons I had is, one, I'm really good at what I do here. But secondly, there were some elements in terms of how I would react under stress and tough decisions that I didn't think my clarity of thought was right to be in that sort of role. And also, my wife at the time was doing a lot of international travel. We had kids at home. The thought of trying to grow into that sort of job just didn't seem right. And I felt very much at peace with it. I felt like, hey, this is, I've never regretted it for 1 minute. And I can celebrate the decision by saying that the two guys that have been in that role since that time have been far better than I ever would have been. So anyway, so that's kind of for me, I think, one, viewing oneself as a steward of the organization, and a steward of your responsibilities, but also being faithful to who God made you to be and not trying to be more than that, and living into that. And I've gotten tremendous joy out of that. And then what that's freed me up to do is be able to mentor and coach people in that role. And there's a whole nother story around people that I was able to impact by doing that and staying in that role.
Yeah. Go ahead, Lisa.
No, I was just going to say, in the book, we do these contrasts throughout the book called the common posture and the uncommon posture, and how to make the shift. And what you've just described is a very uncommon move, right? You were the presumptive CEO because you were your father's son, and you stepped away from that. And even with all the sense of peace that you had, I imagine there was still pressure for you to step into that role, right? Because it was your father's business.
At one level, yes. At another level, it was just never me. And I really, there are moments you kind of think, gosh, I really wish I could have had that, or it was on my business card or something like that. But it's been remarkably easy. And even just reflecting on it now. And I have to say, and I think it reinforced the culture within the company in a way that I never appreciated actually for many years. Not long before I retired, we were in a board retreat, and one of the other members got up, and I was totally blown away. He said, I'm here because of Steve Sawyer. And this is somebody I actually really didn't know that well. And I was really surprised. And he said, but it was about that there was not entitlement here. It was about merit and stewardship.
Wow.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because you have this choice, this moment, and you're like, okay, it's about stewardship. And to Lisa's point, it's a pretty uncommon thing to do. I think and I hear from a lot of leaders who are sort of on the upswing, right? On the upswing, and who are being given more and more responsibility on their shoulders. And that pressure, whether it's coming in, you should take this role, or you should take this on, or you should do X, Y, and Z. There's a lot of you shoulds. And so what I hear you saying over and over, certainly the humility and the stewardship, but also just a real sense of knowing yourself. How did you come to know who you were as a professional so deeply?
I don't want to sound overly spiritual, but I feel like it was just a gift from God, because, as I say, even in college, I kind of figured out that this is what I was meant to do and meant to be. And there was a motivation. It was just, I wanted to be in a job where I could take initiative, and where I could make things happen. And I think that was just how I was wired. So I had that gift early on, and again, never wavered from it. Now that's gotten developed, and there were other ways that manifested itself over time as, I had success, and I was effective, and we grew as a firm. We brought more resources in, we brought other people in, but it was the application of that. It was more applying that in new and creative ways, as opposed to ever departing from that, if you will.
Okay, one more follow-up from me there, and then Lisa, you can take the next one. You just said something, you said we grew. And so now I'm wondering if there is this link in the story between stewardship, humility, staying in your headlights, the language Lisa and I use in our book, and fruitfulness. So can you actually paint a picture for us on, whatever way makes sense of what happened in the company? You talked a little bit about culture. What happened in the company as you didn't step into this role?
Well, and some of this, I was 25 years into being there when this all happened. So I had a long time of being able to grow in this, but also have success in what I was doing and servicing clients and bringing in new clients. I was blessed to work with other people that were essentially like-minded, who had a similar approach to how we developed clients, built trust, engendered confidence. But also we were innovative. I mean, insurance is, changing things in the insurance industry is like turning a battleship in a river. I mean, it's highly codified, very, very regulated. And so trying to do things that are innovative are difficult. And I was privileged and blessed to work with other people who really brought some creative ideas. And I was part of that too, but I was inspired and had vision because of working with other people that were like that. And so we brought some creative approaches that allowed us to attract other people, attracted clients. I mean, big name clients, household names that that everybody on this call would know, or this podcast would know if I mentioned them. And we just had the privilege of working with them, and that engendered, it fed on itself, if you will, and it allowed us to attract other people.
So, Steve, we've talked a little bit about, what faithfulness and fruitfulness looks like in your own life as a leader, how that's impacted the culture of your organization over time. You made a decision not to become CEO. Other people have stepped into that role. What's the culture like today? And how is, if you look back, what are the healthiest parts of the culture in the organization that have sustained over time?
I've used the word stewardship a couple of times,
Yeah.
and I think one of the great privileges and joys I've had is working with a group of senior folks who shared that sense of stewardship in perpetuating the firm as it is. Now, we grew basically 100-fold during the time that I was there. I mean, we went from 35 to over 600 people, one office to 14 at the time. Around from a single office in San Francisco to Honolulu to London by the time I retired. But a part of that was a commitment to perpetuation. And what that involved was a lot of people build up a firm to sell it or to cash out. For us, that we wanted to be fruitful and have the financial rewards inure to those who were part of that process. But it was also about leaving a legacy for other people to be able to enjoy and appreciate, and leaving the firm behind as a better place than we found it. So as part of that, there was a shared sense of leadership, of ownership, of transferring ownership, where a group of us who had significant stakes in the firm actually sold down gradually in small increments over a period of time, as opposed to getting to the end when some of us would retire, and the only way that you could come up with the cash for us to be essentially paid for our ownership stake when we leave is to sell the firm. What we did instead is created a true, what we called perpetuation plan. And it was probably on the agenda at almost every board meeting, where we would be looking at how are we doing with this? How's the financial plan feed into this? And it allowed each of us to be able to, those of us who were in that had significant ownership percentages, just sold down incrementally over the years, so that when each of us retired, it didn't mean we had to sell the firm. It was countercultural to how virtually any firm in our business worked, but it has also meant that we have been able to perpetuate the firm, as the 4 or 5 largest owners at the time, 25 years ago, have all retired, and the firm is continuing to thrive.
Yeah, it is super countercultural, and it requires taking a long-term view. Right?
Absolutely.
Which is, I'm sure there were a number of countercultural moves that y'all made, but that's a big one, right? In a world where businesses are, sort of slaves to quarterly returns and, to annual numbers based on private equity investment and other things, your ability to look out decades even and say, here's what we want to have occur. And so we'll put a plan in place and follow it. It's just unbelievably commendable is
thank you.
Not a strong enough word, but
we were blessed. I mean, I think we all felt very blessed, and part of the commitment to do that is that people recognized that blessing and wanting to be a part of that process, but also the work environment that we were in, the culture, and the joy of being a part of that. So it had its rewards, both financial and otherwise.
Yeah, everything, Steve, that you've described throughout your own journey and what happened even in the aftermath of you saying no to the CEO role has to do with people and relationships. There's a great book out there. You probably are familiar with it. A researcher named Daniel Pink wrote a number of years ago that's titled "To Sell is Human." Right. And he was really trying to help people understand that sales is a human relationship, and that we're all in some way or another selling. Right. And he would translate that into influencing. What I'm hearing you describe is it was all in and through the relationships that you had with your people internally as well as your clients externally. And that created this container for all of this growth to occur. How do you uniquely go about building relationships? How do you find those people that you trust and that are like-minded? And it's the code every business who cares about culture wants to crack. And I'm super interested in your insight.
Well, I think it's both, as you just said, Lisa, both internal and external. I think internally, it's one, just showing that you genuinely and authentically care about people. Right. I think one of the ways I'd like to think I did that is that I really invested time and energy and focus on bringing people alongside me and helping them develop and grow. Now, there was, I'd like to say, a sense of calling and purpose and joy in doing that, but there was also, to a practical level, in my success, I could never have managed and serviced all the clients that I brought in. So needed to build a team, needed to build people that could come alongside me or come in behind me and do a lot of the work and execute. So there was, at a practical level, that was just what needed to happen to be able to grow the business and not keep it just this little cottage firm, so to speak, that might have been been a part of its origin, so to speak. But I have to say, I got untold joy and fulfillment out of just seeing people grow and flourish and reach a fuller level of their potential as we work together. When I retired, I had the joy of seeing a number of people. A number of people said to me, you had the terrific impact on me. Even a few people have said I changed their lives.
Mm.
I mean, who wouldn't want to hear that in the sense, in terms of just getting a sense of impact that you might have had on someone, and that your work meant something. So there's a real joy in that. I think outwardly, I think it's just showing up and being, again, having integrity and being honest. I remember walking out of a meeting once, and a younger colleague just turned to me and said, "Boy, your clients really trust you." You know,
Mm.
yeah.
Mm.
I'm not quite sure how to answer it. I was just showing up and
Mm.
being me, I guess.
Mm.
But I think it's obviously telling the truth, giving them sage advice that is helpful, that isn't just self-serving or for our benefit, but gosh, if you do what's right, what goes around comes around. I mean, it gives you just earn their trust. It allows you, and particularly in insurance, it's a renewal year over year. So you want a continuous relationship. Doing what's right in the near term is what builds confidence and trust for the long term.
Mm. Mm. I think it's worth pausing at this point. For anyone who's listening, I'm going to go out on a limb here. And I know that there's a variety of individual and commercial, et cetera. And I know where, you've been in that. But I just wonder how many people would say, yeah, insurance, that's a field of integrity and trust and humility. So I just really feel this contrast in what you're talking about. And I have been honestly really encouraged by just how you approach building that trust, engendering trust, as you said a few times today. Help us, like for those of us who, and I think Lisa has it right, that this kind of relational building, this kind of trust building, this kind of aware that there are transactions in our work. This is very real for many, many people in their work. So to anyone who has a sales component, a trust building component, a culture building component, part of their work, you're saying, I do that by showing up as myself. That's like actually what I do, which I think is actually pretty radical. And I know that you've sort of broken that down into some different aspects. So bring us a little bit further into that world. Like, what does it look like for you to engender trust?
Well, so I think first of all, and I have to say, it's funny you mentioned insurance. I mean, when you go to parties or something like that, and somebody asks what you did, you kind of, it wasn't the sexy thing to talk about, particularly in Silicon Valley where I live, relative to what most other people were doing. So first of all, I think showing up and just taking a genuine interest in the potential client or potential client that you have. It's first of all, you start out asking questions. Michaela, I shared with you the sort of selling process that I use. The first, there's just the first couple steps are just about asking what are called need development questions. It's first of all understanding who is this client, what's the company, what's the nature of their operations, what is it they need. Now, some of that is just having, frankly, some good business background, understanding the nature of what it is, but then bringing competence and knowledge about what we bring as skill to the table. And again, not trying to be more than what you are. There might be instances where, I got, particularly the latter part of my career, I got virtually everything by referral or because of prior clients, because of the work that we'd done. And sometimes we'd get approached with something where it wasn't a fit. And I think just being honest, it's, hey, this is not what we do well. You should go here, or, or even if I'm not the person, then giving it to somebody maybe in our firm who is. But first of all, it's understanding, and showing also by the kinds of questions that you ask that you know and understand what the issues are. And then asking questions in such a way before you've ever told them anything about what we can do for them, is asking questions to help them understand their problems and the issues that they have. And there are ways of doing that. There's specific techniques, which is part of the competence puzzle. And it's a big part of where I did coaching and mentoring with people to help them understand. Rather than coming in, I mean, one of the things that drove me crazy, if somebody came in, whether they were trying to sell to me or somebody in our firm was trying to sell something, if I can use that term, and start talking. Absolutely the wrong approach.
Right.
It's coming in, ask questions, understand. And a lot of it is the way you ask the questions and how they're phrased and the nature of the questions that says to somebody, I care about you, I understand your business, and I have ways and we have ways that we can help you. And actually, if you're doing it right, you actually have them wanting you, but if you've done it right and you've set it up well, and it's not in a way that's in any way manipulative, it's got integrity to it. They're wanting to know, well, what is it you can do? How would you solve that problem that you've now raised?
When I'm coaching young entrepreneurs, Steve, I often try and help them understand, and it takes a while. It sounds very simple that people are not a means to your end. They're a means, they're an end unto themselves. And if you invest in them first as people, who you care about, then you're going to make a lot more progress than if they feel like they're being, a cog in your wheel of progress. Right. And that's what you're just describing here. There's lots of sales techniques out there and ways to do sales. What I hear you describing is a very human and consultative way of doing sales. Right.
Yep.
And really building the relationship. Can you think of a time when you had to make a very hard decision that involved, operating with integrity, where you had to, tell a client something hard or not take business or something like that? I'm just curious how you go about dealing with a really difficult moment where the move would normally be very like, okay, we'll just, cut our losses and move on. But that's not the integrity move.
Yeah. You probably haven't worked very long if you haven't had one of those experiences. And I can think of, a couple, there was one time where frankly, we just made a mistake in terms of what the cost of something was going to be. Now, fortunately, that was a client that was probably we had a client that I'd had for over 20 years anyway. And so there was a lot, but the people had changed, the players had changed over time, but we had a long history of trust. But frankly, somebody had made a mistake in terms of, frankly, just what the cost was going to be. And it was not insignificant. I mean, it was a big number.
Right.
And, it was just about, I had to go and sit with the CEO and the CFO, the company, and just said, we made this mistake. I wasn't the one who did it, but, I had to take responsibility for it and to say, hey, we did not communicate this accurately. And they actually paid the difference. They,
Wow.
And I think we took a discount in terms of what our compensation would have been. I don't remember the details of it now, but I think another time I think of a situation where things weren't going well. And in the course of the discussion, again, and this is with a CEO and a CFO, they finally said, I think it might be better if we just, if we parted ways. And it was very amiable. It was not, there wasn't anger involved. I would say some of the more difficult ones, though, I'm not going to use the person's name, but this is a household name that everybody would know. I had the most difficult client I ever had was somebody who had an enormous ego. And he thought he knew more than we did. And that was a hard one. We managed to hold on to that for a number of years, but ultimately the firm stepped away from working with them because it was just too difficult after a while.
I think the thing I hear in that story is it's the point that you've been underscoring a few points for us all in this whole episode. One is know yourself and don't do more than you should do, whether that's individually or organizationally. Lead with humility and care. I think the flip side of that is, in a healthy way, ask others to care for you too, right? Like ask the relationship to be good.
Yeah.
So those are just both really interesting points. I have a final question for you, Steve. This is a question that we ask every guest. And this is, if you were to look back, like 25-year-old, 30, 35, pick an age, your old Steve, what encouragement would you want to give to him about, especially about the hidden work of leadership, this kind of internal stuff, but really anything along the way as a leader?
Yeah, I think, in thinking about that, I think I had some, well, first of all, being a legacy, being the essentially the son of the founder, had some implications to it, to put it mildly. I wish I had one level of awareness, but I wish I'd had a higher level of awareness of the full implications of that. Probably more in terms of my own individuality and my own self-awareness, and frankly, courage, maybe to be different in some ways. Then it took me probably 10 years into it to really come to grips with that. And some of that was kind of on the personal side, as well as coming to grips with differentiating myself, frankly, in this case, probably from my father. But and as it related to my family. So I wished I'd had more consciousness and awareness of that early on, and maybe a little more courage in that particular realm. I think I was, I could certainly have courage in some context, but I had to grow into that. So that would be the big thing. I think also probably an awareness of being a little more flexible and being and not just doing it the way that I saw sometimes. So listening to others, and I think I grew into that. That was something that came with time. But I wished I'd done it earlier in both cases. So, well,
the story that you told for us is a story of courage. I experience you as a very open person. So it's clear that the messages you would say to younger Steve have been things that you've worked on. Steve, it's been such a joy to have you, and we're just really grateful for you coming on the podcast.
Well, thank you for having me again. I feels privileged to be a part of this, and love the work that you and the Dupree Center are doing. And please, just want to encourage you to carry on with it too.
Thank you for tuning in to the Hidden Work of Leadership. We hope you enjoyed today's episode and found it insightful. The Hidden Work of Leadership is brought to you by the Max Dupree Center for Leadership at Fuller Seminary, where we envision a world in which leaders across industries and seasons of life are deeply formed as the people of God, so that they might seek the very best for the people and systems entrusted to their care. Our episodes are produced by Justin Heap, who ensures our engineering and editing is engaging and sounds just right. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing, rating, and reviewing us on your favorite podcast platform. It really helps us reach more listeners like you. You can also follow the Dupree Center on LinkedIn and Instagram for updates and behind-the-scenes content. For more information about today's episode and access to additional resources, visit our website at dupree.org. That's DEPREE.org. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time on The Hidden Work of Leadership.